Good day, everybody. I hope you got those emails drafted because we're talking about the Great Resignation in this episode of Beyond the Borderline with your hosts, Connor, Cam, Ryan, and Phil.
Welcome back. So this is episode 25. We're a quarter of the way to 100, and it feels good. So thanks everyone for helping us to get this far. I didn't actually tell any of the boys yet, but we just crossed over 1,000 listens. So that's over 23 public episodes, over 1,000 listens. So thank you everyone for listening and for supporting us this way. So yeah, today we're departing big time from our topic last week, which was haunted locations. And this week we're going to touch on something maybe that affects us more as young people in the workforce, and that is the Great Resignation. So just to start it off and kind of give you guys a picture of what this phenomenon is. In August of 2021, well, in the entire year of 2021, there were 38 million people in the United States that quit their jobs, according to the Department of Labor. In November of 2021, 4.8 million people quit their jobs. That's the highest number of people to resign in any given month in 20 years. So basically, we have a few questions that we need to ask. One, is this Great Resignation phenomenon real? Is it as big, as impactful as some people would have it seem? Or are the statistics a little bungled and maybe don't tell the full picture of what's going on? Two, if it is happening, and if it is happening to such an extent that it has a major impact on our economy and on how people view labor going forward, what happens after? Is this going to be a movement that ushers in a new golden age for workers and gives them more bargaining power compared to their employers? Or will it do nothing at all? Or will it result in kind of a mass exodus from the workforce, akin to the quote unquote lying flat protest in China, which we can talk about, but basically something akin to a collapse in the consumer-based domestic economy? And then three, is this Great Resignation, is this exodus from the workforce by millennials and Gen Z justified? Is it motivated by legitimate grievances that they have? Or is this a case of young people are super entitled? So this is it covers a lot of ground. This is probably going to be a two-part episode, so buckle up. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about, and this is really important, obviously very topical to the current situation, especially in this pandemic / post-pandemic era. So yeah, let's dive into it. And this was Phil's topic of choice, so I'm going to throw it off to him to kind of explain how he sees this whole phenomenon, and then we can go from there.
All right, thank you for that intro, Cameron. I wanted to first just cover the first question on if the Great Resignation does exist, why does it exist? Or on the flip side, if it doesn't exist, why is it getting the recognition that it's getting? So I take the standing based on the extent that it's been given. I'm not sure. One reason for why I think that it may not be happening is just employers' frustration through this entire hiring process through COVID. I think it may be like a manifestation of their frustration, where they think that is a supposed labor shortage. But I take the stance that it does exist. There's a few reasons for that I think. If you do think it exists, in my opinion, I think there's kind of two camps that you could sit in. The first being that the modern worker thinks that they deserve more from their employer. And the second is that they are seeking the least work possible.
Right.
So one, they're quitting their jobs because they could get a better job at a higher pay without less stress, or they're seeking to circumvent the entire economy and just do whatever they want at any given time.
Like not to be lazy, but to be entrepreneurial, do you mean? Or both?
No, the you deserve better is the entrepreneurial, like start your own business, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the second camp would be trying to work less,
Right. Okay.
essentially.
Yeah.
Um, I'll just throw out a few stats. I
Can I
definitely came to the yeah.
I was just gonna say, like you say people are lazy and stuff like that, but I think, and this is my point of view on a lot of things, is like people value their time, right? Like time is not free, so it's like, are you willing to work harder for more money? Yeah, but are you willing to work harder for the same pay? Probably not. So I think that's a big thing that's affecting this like resignation, rather than being lazy or not wanting to work more. It's like, if you want me to work more or work harder, I need to be compensated for that. And I think there was a disconnect between that, where companies just expected you to do more without being compensated for it. Where now
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like, and I think that this is like a wake up call to companies, where it's like, well, if I want my employees to go beyond, over and above and beyond, well, there needs to be some sort of compensation for that, whether it be more money, more time off later down the road, like whatever it is. And I think, that was a thing that's opening the eyes to a lot of people, rather than, as you said, like lazy or not wanting to work hard. It's like, my time is valuable, so if you want me to spend more time at work or doing more work, make it worth my time to do it.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
My argument essentially, um, I don't necessarily agree that like in general like people are becoming less lazy. But what I'm trying to uncover is which one of those two pillars are more true. Um, is the worker um, thinking that they're entitled, or are they seeking less work? So I think, and I'll name a few things later on. Um, I'm starting to think that there's kind of like two philosophies that I want to go into after. But I think generally we have it pretty good in Western society
Mm-hmm.
in terms of labor laws, things like that. In the in Europe, they're becoming or they're cracking down on labor laws, but I'm under the impression that um, they're not deserving more; they're just seeking more. Um,
Not deserving more what, money or benefits or
Compensation or work-life balance or something of that nature. They're
as
not
in general, you
satisfied.
mean?
Yeah, they're not satisfied with their working
Right.
conditions at this point. So there's a phenomenon that I came aware of called lying flat. So typically in Western society, we've all heard of 9 to 5. Um, a
Well,
nine to five.
I think you should preface that by saying that's like, lying flat is not European, that's China.
Yeah. Well, I'll go into the European side of like the labor law specifically. Um, but
The lying flat movement isn't part of Europe. That's part of China.
yeah, it is part of China, and yes. So essentially, what the lying flat philosophy is because, well, I talked about how in Western society it's kind of 9 to 5 is typically, if you work in an office or things like that, that's typically the hours that you would see per day. Whereas in China, it's much more like a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, with a 1 day of rest. It's very
Mm-hmm.
China right now, at least, is very keen on becoming as productive as possible, um, having producing in abundance as possible, and so they need to generally get more out of their workers. So they think that this is the best way to do that is just to work them essentially until they revolt like this.
Yeah, which
So
is
this
actually
lying
really
flat,
interesting. Like, I imagine you're gonna touch on this shortly, Phil, but I just want to say how like dichotomous that relationship is from a country which has been under strict communist rule for the last 73 years, you know, communism being a movement originally born um, out of the theory that, you know, workers' rights and yada yada yada. Um, and it's just really interesting to see that one of the most prominent communist countries in the world, although of course in many ways they're not communist at all, um, is exploiting their workers to such an extent. You know, it's just very strange, because that's the argument from the communist theorists and the Marxists, is that capitalism is exploitation, right? And that working, you know, uh, selling your labor is exploitation. Where now you see China under the rule of the Communist Party doing the exact same thing. Um, so, but of course, you know, they would say that their economy isn't. I mean, it's not a socialist economy, but yeah, it's just a really interesting double standard, I think, that they have.
Mhm.
But yeah, anyway, go on.
Yeah, so the lying flat phenomenon kind of ties into the deserving better principle of the Great Resignation, because I mean, obviously, like at some point that's just not sustainable, and partly they're working these long hours because of like peer pressure, familial pressure, cultural pressure. Like you'll be shunned if you don't put in these long hours and get these prestigious degrees and have a
Mhm.
great job. Like it's like ingrained in their society that they just have to do this. And then just as of recently, um, they're starting to revolt, and they're like napping in the middle of the street because they're just burnt out.
Mhm.
They can't do it any longer. And then another phenomenon, also starting in China, um, as kind of like a next step and more of a radical step than the lying flat, and it's kind of making its way into North America, is the it's called Sun Hate God, which is kind of a philosophy where if you were to do 1 day of work, you have the means to have 3 days of pleasure. So it's kind of like a dichotomy where you would only work to be able to have
Mm,
time of your own.
right.
There's purpose is stripped from it, and the only reason why you wake up to work is to have pleasure.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know about that, man. Like, yeah, we can
Isn't
go
that
into
kind of
that.
it's interesting.
isn't
It's
isn't that
interesting.
kind of what like life is right now when you think about it? Like when you're in school, you work over the summertime, and then sometimes you keep a job in the school year, but it's only like 1 or 2 days a week or whatever, and then it's enough money for you to like have fun with your friends and stuff like that. And then after all your schooling is done or whatever, and you start in the workforce, then you work for like 20 years, 25 years, whatever, and then you retire. And then when you retire, you're on as like what you would consider to be like 1 day of work for 3 days of pleasure. It's like maybe you don't get those pleasure, like those 3 days of pleasure in a row after your 1 day of work, but then it's reciprocated once you retire.
Yeah, I just think like there's a bit of a problem with the
Well,
whole
there's a
language
bit,
around.
yeah. It's kind
But
of like, if I may, it's kind of you're prolonging um leisure for greater success when you retire. But this is kind of like the flip side where you're like impulsive about your decisions. Essentially, you're just like doing whatever you want when you want. I just think it's really interesting. Um, Kind of this like whole idea that the only reason why you work is to like enjoy it, but at the end of the day, there's meaning, there's responsibility. There's many issues that are kind of diluted
yeah,
through
like
that
it
lens.
makes sense for like 20-year-olds,
Hmm.
and like it is an appealing philosophy. But then like a lot of appealing philosophies are not necessarily pathways to successful being in the world, and it's like it just completely takes away from, like you said, responsibilities. And like, look, in a decade we're going to be trying to raise families and stuff, so work is going to take on a lot different meaning than just um for our own pleasure. I feel like it's so tempting, but it's such a shallow way of looking at life. Like,
Yeah, when you have
Let's
a
just drag myself to my job so that I can, have fun. It's like it goes to the real heart of the question of, you know, is personal happiness and like seeking fun and contentment really the goal of life? You could say it is, and it's hard to argue that, right? But it,
if
it,
you have the
it totally strips
responsibility,
away meaning.
yeah, if you have the responsibility of family, it's a lot different. Like you can't really have like those 3 days of pleasure. Well, if you work one day for yourself and you have 3 days of pleasure for yourself, well, like if you have a family to raise, like kids and stuff like that, like
Mm-hmm.
then you have to sacrifice their life, which you brought into. So you should have some sort of responsibility over at least making sure they make it to 18 somewhat comfortably, I would say. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
And
not
also
saying.
it fosters like a complete lack of care in what you do. And if everybody thought that way and nobody gave a shit about their jobs, like what kind of state would our country be in? I mean, would you want the people managing your money to not give a shit about their jobs? Would you want your boss not to give a shit about their job? Would you want your politicians and your uh the people that run the supply chains and
bureaucrats,
stuff not to give a shit about their jobs? Right? It's like at some point, look, we won't be able to enjoy the service economy that we currently enjoy and all the amazing things that we have in such a wealthy society if that was the case.
yeah.
But is there a balance to be struck? Maybe.
I want to circle back to the original thing about the Great Resignation and just like give some like personal input and personal experience that I've seen from it because um and I know you have like a certain way of thinking about this, Phil, but I think like that golden age that they were talking about is kind of happening right now. Like with all those people quitting, there was definitely a big shift from an employer's market to an employee's market. Like before it was hard to find a decent job uh because those spots were already filled, and then people are hiring, and then like with COVID certain markets shifted. Like I know I'm in the tech industry, so there was like a giant boom in that because everything went online. And you know I don't really, yeah, I guess I can disclose, like I'm in like the cybersecurity realm of things, and so that was a big market, and because of that there was a big boom for demand. And then there was a big, like as the company was growing there was more and more spots that needed to be filled. And maybe it was like the perfect storm where there was a demand, there was a need for jobs, and it's an employees market, so they need people to fill these jobs. I got a job that I, you know 5 years ago I probably would have needed more experience to get it. I've been successful in it, which is nice, but like this opportunity probably would have not presented itself 5 years ago to me.
Mm-hmm.
um and even like I'm just saying, like not like 5 years ago when I was like younger, I'm saying like if I was the same age as I am now 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to get this position. So I think it is an employee's market. Like I'm definitely getting a very good salary for what I'm doing. um I'm getting compensated, I would say, more than what the norm would have been 5 years ago, or expected norm would have been 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
especially for like an entry level position in this company that I'm at.
It's hard to
So,
tell if it's indicative of an entire market shift, though.
well,
Like,
like I'm getting messages on LinkedIn every day for people asking me like, "Hey, we have this opening of this job. Do you
yeah,
want to? Do you want it?" Like, people are reaching out on a daily basis, asking to for interviews and stuff like that. So I would say it's 1,000% an employee's market right now, and I would say this is the golden age because you know there's lots of you get really good pay, you get good benefit. Like I get with my position now and a lot of other positions, you get full benefits. And if you don't get full benefits, there's some sort of compensation, whether it be like some companies don't do any benefits and they say you get an extra 3 grand to spend however you want a year, whatever it is.
but would you say that's probably mostly or even only in the tech industry? Like, for example, the most of the people that resigned in the Great Resignation were service sector, hospitality, restaurants, travel and tourism, stuff like that. And it's like those people don't necessarily have. I'm just skeptical that it'll usher in like a wave of, like you said, switching to an employee's economy. I'm not sure that we're actually going to have as much bargaining power as we think going ahead. I mean, it's not clear that wages overall are rising. I mean, they're not rising to keep up with inflation, especially with inflation running rampant as it is currently. And so, I mean, I think in the tech sector, like you're saying, that's definitely like has exploded, and like especially remote work as well is going to do wonders for workers' rights, I think.
Yeah. Now,
But
like when you say about
yeah,
the service industry, so like I mean, before my job now, I was working well, originally it was a blue collar job and then it turned into a sales position in that blue collar job. But like I feel like if you can do a job decently, even like half decently well, you can transfer your skills into so many different areas. So if you feel like you're not being compensated correctly, or you're not being treated as you should, I believe you can switch over to a new section, a new sector of business, a new company where you will be appreciated. And um like as you said, with all those service industry people quitting and stuff like that, there's definitely open positions. And if a and I like to think that most companies are smart enough, they're going to be like, well, if all these people are quitting from the company, we're doing something wrong. Let's look at it and figure out how we're going to do better.
yeah, you would hope
So I
that
feel,
would be how it works. Yeah.
and I'm going
Some
to say
people
like,
feel stuck though. Like, but I agree with your message, which is, yeah, if you don't feel like you're doing meaningful work and you're burning out, then leave and take your skills to market for
yeah,
sure. I believe in
unless
that.
if you're working in something that you're not that passionate about, like if you're like, here's my thing is like, if there's something that I'm like gonna be like 1,000% like, oh my god, like this is like the dream company, I would definitely take less pay. But if it's something that I like, okay, whatever, like it's a good job, then compensate me for that passion, because I'll chase that money all day. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
So
I think a lot of companies understand that. Like, there's some jobs that aren't someone like, when you're a kid, you're like, what do you want to do? No one's gonna be like, yeah, I want to become like a web developer, or yeah, I want to program.
Yeah.
But you compensate people for that, and they're like, yeah, it's a job and it pays me well, so I'm happy. Because I think there's definitely a skill where it's like, you know passion, like your outlook on your passion or what you're passionate about versus the money you're getting paid. So, and I think a lot of companies do realize, it might not be the most glorious work, but if I'm going to pay someone a lot of money, they're going to be happy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
here's my initial take on this idea of the golden age of employment and this being an employee market. How do I want to phrase this? What a lot of people don't understand is capitalism is a voluntary process. So when an employer comes to you and says, I'm going to pay you $16 an hour to do this job for me, if you don't like those terms, there is nothing forcing you to take that job, right? That's how capitalism works. In comparison to what we're seeing in China, they're basically saying you have to work these hours or you have no job. That's why people are lying down and saying we don't want to work these hours. So when I start to see people who are saying, well, I think I don't need to work these many hours to get this amount of pay, purely on the basis because they don't want to work that many hours, that I see as entitlement and laziness. Now, I know this Great Resignation is not that simple, but from the research that I've done, I've seen a lot of that, and I don't think that is good for the economy. That's certainly not good. And if more and more millennials and people of our generation are starting to feel that way, they need a big wake-up call, because I don't know who started to tell people that it's bad to work hard, because at the end of the day, it's not bad to work hard. I find a lot of, fulfillment and enjoyment in working hard. It keeps me busy because I've lived the lifestyle of, just sitting at home and doing nothing and only working just enough to have money, and then spending the rest of my time to just have a leisurely lifestyle. It sounds great on paper, but in actual practice, it gets pretty boring at the end of the day. You get kind of depressed.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah,
living paycheck to paycheck sucks, dude.
Yes,
And it's like,
it's not fun.
and you
It's
don't
the
really
most
aspire.
physiologically damning thing that you can do to your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't aspire to anything great if all you're doing is living for the next moment or the next weekend, like. But okay, on
well,
what
I'm gonna
Ryan
say
was saying,
some
like,
people are forced to live paycheck to paycheck just
yes,
because
yes,
of like
yes.
the like circumstance of their environment or whatever. But I
Absolutely.
agree, like it's great to have purpose, but if you want me to work more than what I feel like is enough for, like, it gives me enough purpose, then compensate me for working over what
I want to address that point. And the pandemic really changed things a lot for smart business owners. A lot of smart business owners, the ones that manage to stay afloat, regardless of getting, wage subsidies. In Canada, we got, small businesses got a lot of help from the Liberal government, which in a lot of ways has put our economy in the shitter. But I digress. Regardless of those businesses that did receive wage subsidy, a lot of them figured out that there's a lot of dead weight in our businesses. There's a lot of people filling multiple positions when maybe one or two people could fulfill the positions of 10 people, right? A lot of businesses figured out, hey, look, we don't need to hire this many people. We can operate just as efficiently with less people and less overhead. And in fact, that'll improve our efficiency. So what's happening now is all these workers who were basically just not working all that hard and getting paid $20 an hour, suddenly they're having to work a little bit harder because there's less people in the workforce to do those jobs. So if those people are saying, oh, I need to be compensated more because I'm working more, well, hold on here a second. You should have been working this hard from the beginning. Yes, it's my fault as the employer for not making sure you were working that hard, but now I'm making sure that you're working that hard. So I'm sorry, Candyland's over. This is the way it's going to be. If you don't like it, there's nothing forcing you to stay here.
Now, if you sign a contract and you say this is the parameters of the job, unless, like, you guys both sign this contract as the employer and the employee, you sign the contract saying this is the job expectation, and you meet that job expectation, then
Well, that's a completely
it's not.
different issue, Connor.
Well,
Contract
that's
work
what
is
it
a
is, though.
very contract work is a very vague and broad topic that does not fall under traditional employment.
Well, okay, here
Yes, it is.
let's do this
Every
then.
time
Hold on,
every
hold
time
on,
you
hold
get a
on.
job, you have to sign the employment contract, and in that employment contract, it states what the expectations of your job are. Now, do some people go over what that expectation is? 100%. And why do they do that? Because it's going to give them career growth. But some people are happy and are content with their current position. They'll do what the job requires them to do, but they don't want to do more because that inflicts on their personal time, which is fine. But I think it's, like, as an employer, if someone already signed this contract and you're like, well, we don't, there's a lot of like there's a lot of there's a lot of, what do I want to say, like empty weight or whatever, like people that aren't pulling their load, you can get rid of them and you can hire somebody else to take. One person can take on three people's jobs, but in that contract, you have to say this is the expectation, and they have to agree to that.
Okay,
Now,
but Connor, a lot of the times those expectations are overly broad, especially let's take a really simple. Let's say three people are working at McDonald's and they all sign the same employment contract saying your duties are to cook, operate the till, and clean. Let's say two of those people are fulfilling that job and the third person is kind of being lazy and not doing as much and is getting paid. And then the pandemic happens and he gets cut out, or two of those three people get cut out because they're not worth the amount of work they're actually doing. And that third person is now doing all that work. Yeah, you might have an argument to say, listen, I'm doing the job of three people, but at the end of the day, you're still working within the parameters that were set of your contract. You are working these hours, and these are your duties within those hours. If all of a sudden now you feel you're worth more money for doing that job, you can make that claim all you want. But that's what happened. But that's the beauty of capitalism, is if you feel that way, you don't have to stay in that job. So you can go find another job. But at the end of the day, the employer says, this is what I'm paying you for this job. If you don't like it, too bad.
Okay. So then this is the question then, really, that we should be asking, which is, well, one of the most broad questions you could possibly ask, because it gets to the heart of our entire economic structure. But basically what we're talking about is, like, how much. Look, I think there are some legitimate grievances to this. One of the main questions at the beginning was, what is this motivated by? Laziness and perhaps a certain attraction to socialist Marxist ideas, or legitimate grievances. And I think there are legitimate grievances. For example, inflation is at a 30-year high in Canada and the United States. Houses are rapidly becoming unaffordable. for people of our age, you know. And there are still mechanisms. If you're smart with your money, of course you can save money, you can invest money. There are many ways, and there are jobs everywhere. So yeah, eventually you'll be able to live the life that our parents live, for example. But there is not having meaningful work is, I think, a legitimate issue in some ways. And while I would agree with the general sentiment of, if you don't like your job, go find a new one. I think it still gets to, I don't think we can discard what these people are saying necessarily, because I think it speaks to the fact that like our whole culture, there's kind of like a cultural burnout in a sense. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I got
where
a question for you, Cam. Actually, at the beginning of the episode, you brought up the stats about how many people left their job.
yeah.
Do you have the stats about of those people that quit their jobs? How many of them moved to a different role or moved to a different company?
No,
Because
I do have another stat of, so there's one that's kind of on that, which is, so also this is according to NBC, in August of 2021 in the United States, 55% of people polled said that they were going to look for a new job that year.
If the
That's
Great Resignation is a product of people actually realizing their potential and they're wanting to execute and prove that they're better than the job that they're actually doing, more power to them. If that is actually what's going on here, that's great. But if it's what we've been talking about, prior to what I just said, if it's actually a product of entitlement and laziness, which I'm more inclined to believe it is, that's a huge issue.
Okay, so then
But
what about this question then? As
I
a
have a
conservative person, this is the question that I am inclined to ask. Is it fair to say to everyone who doesn't feel like they're being worked fair hours or being compensated properly, or their labor is being exploited, whatever language you want to use, is it fair to say life is rough, get over it?
Do you want the
well,
black
to an
and white
extent,
answer, or do you want the
but
more gray answer?
here's my thing is like, if you're not happy with your job, I don't agree with quitting and doing nothing. I say like, if you're not happy with your job, stay in your job, but go find something better.
Yeah.
And, sometimes that means, as
But,
shitty as it is, go to
like,
night school if you really want to change your trajectory. And you can't do it just purely based off your experience and what you've already done in the past. Go back to school, take a couple courses, and then
yeah. So it is fair to
The
say life is
problem-
rough.
Yeah, life
The
is
problem
rough.
with that-
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are better off than others, through inheritance, intelligence. But should that mean because those people are better off through no effort of their own that they should be brought down to the level of all the suffering that others are experiencing? No, not at all.
No, yeah, I don't think I was saying that really. But Phil, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say that just purely switching jobs may not get to like the true root of the problem. Like for example, in the work from home or remote scenario, I was reading an article, and through the pandemic, more than half of the remote workers were up until midnight working, whether
Yeah.
that's answering emails, whether it's being online. So you can certainly quit your job and go to something that you perceive as better.
now
But
when you say that, Phil,
if the landscape has changed so much, then it becomes a different question. It's like,
Right.
well, where do, like Cameron mentioned at the beginning, like this balance between employer and employee, like who
Here's
has the upper hand?
here's the thing
Yeah.
about that, Phil.
Like,
I
is the
gotta
whole
mention that,
system fucked basically?
Mhm.
because I know a lot of remote workers. Personally, I'm a remote going to hybrid, but anyways, there's a big difference because you say people are staying up till midnight. They're not working from 9 in the morning till midnight, right?
Mhm.
They're gonna start their day at 9. They're gonna work for an hour. They're gonna take a couple hours out. They're gonna go for a walk. They're gonna take their dog for a walk. They're gonna go do errands, groceries, whatever, and then come back, work for a couple hours, and go. So there's almost an argument to make there. Is that better? Because instead of working a 9 to 5, you're working a couple hours here, going and doing some personal enjoyment stuff, or doing some personal stuff, coming back to work, going away from your computer, doing some other stuff, and then coming back. A lot of people appreciate that more because you can work, and like especially if you have kids and stuff like that, they come home from school at 3 o'clock from 3 to 5 you can't work. So those are like 2 hours in the morning, getting them off to school in the morning. You got a couple hours off there. So being
No,
able to work.
It's not
around
clear
your
that
own
that's better
schedule.
though. And okay, wait. So let's cut it. We have a minute left. So I think maybe we'll pick up on that. So we'll keep this discussion going. Let's frame it as, for next episode, is the pandemic induced phenomenon of working from home actually something good? And is that going to ameliorate these grievances by the people who have been resigning in this Great Resignation phenomenon? And we need to discuss, and I think, Phil, you were alluding to it earlier with the European discussions, but 4-day work week, is
Mhm.
that, does that have the potential to ameliorate some of these
Yeah.
grievances,
Anyways,
real or
everyone
perceived?
tune in for the next episode on Friday. Remember, like, share, comment, and remember, take care, brush your hair.